Vance gave a wonderful speech at the Munich Security Conference that deserves to resonate through time. Vance gave a wonderful speech at the Munich Security Conference that deserves to resonate through time. I will have to put a break and some commentary in the middle. My apologies, but I really don't want to break copyright.
We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners.
To me, it is absolutely shocking how the West has moved in a direction that is closer to the old USSR than it was back when the Cold War was won. You would think that having won the Cold War and seeing how hollow Marxist authoritarian and totalitarian values were, and how it absolutely ruined countries under the heavy yoke of that tyranny, that the West would have moved even further away. Unfortunately, the West did not. And there has been a march through the institutions by the Marxists, capturing the Democrats, the educational institutions, schools and universities, and even many multinational corporations. Fortunately, the rot has been held at bay with the election of Trump in the United States. But unfortunately, that is not the case for most of Europe, or Australia, or Canada, or the UK. If you enjoy this sort of content, please like, share and subscribe. Now back to Vance.
I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
It is stunning to me, as someone who lived through the Cold War, that the idea of religious persecution and cancelling elections is seen as acceptable by the so-called liberal democracies. Getting rid of religious persecution and allowing freedom of speech, albeit slowly in both cases, was a hallmark of the Enlightenment. What we are seeing being pursued by the forces on the left, however, is an Orwellian retreat into dark in the name of progress. To the left, racism is to be used, but they call it opposed to racism. The same applies to sexism and misogyny. To them, how dare individuals, no matter how well informed, have a view different to received wisdom, the wisdom they seek to force on people. Simply think of the COVID era in terms of that. These sorts of moves is how civilization dies. Commitment to freedom of speech is really easy when the defense is of speech that you agree with. The acid test comes with the issue when someone says something that you despise? Will you then choose to defend their right to freedom of expression? In the view of the left, the answer is a resounding no. Whatever happened to the expression, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me"? There is a reason that freedom of speech is so central to the American Constitution. It is, after all, the First Amendment. The problem with censoring speech is that you're censoring ideas. And when you look at progress, it has been defined by the ability to contest ideas and learn from those contests. Indeed, as the great John Stuart Mill wrote in his seminal book on liberty, "He who knows only his side of the argument knows little of that." Meaning that if you only know your own point of view, your own argument, and do not allow counter-arguments, you don't even know your own position very well, as you have not considered all of the possibilities. The West has to stay strong, has to defend freedoms, and has to defend the right to even say hateful things. At present, most of the West have become nations of children who have never grown up, for whom bad things happening is always someone else's responsibility and someone else's fault, who need to be protected by mummy and daddy, in this case, the state. It is up to conservatives in the West to fight for fundamental freedoms and never to surrender them. Far too many in our nations have literally died for these freedoms. We need to resist simply taking the easy road and capitulating to those who would take away our freedoms simply because it is easier, less challenging, and convenient. What do you think of Vance's speech and the issues that he has brought up? Please let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.